Good morning to you, Mr. Kramer. It's been quite some time since our last little conversation. And I remember last when we spoke to you, you had wonderful insights about how we can compare what we're seeing in the current presidential administration in the United States to what we've had before. And I think we kind of came to the conclusion that we're in essentially uncharted territory, but there are still some similarities with the past. So the reason why Žygis and myself wanted to speak to you today was to discuss what happened over the weekend in Florida, more specifically in Miami, I believe, where Ukrainian President Zelensky met with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, of all places. And Yeah, so we just wanted to hear your take on that, if I may ask.
Sure. Technically, it's in West Palm Beach where Mar-a-Lago was based, but a little north of Miami. But no, it's great to be back with both of you. And I wish you and everyone in Lithuania a healthy, happy new year ahead. And I hope 2026 is better than 2025 for everyone, including, of course, our friends in Ukraine who have been suffering tremendously this past year from Russia's relentless bombardment, which had continued even over the weekend as President Zelensky was traveling first to Canada and then the United States. And Russia unleashed a barrage of missiles and drone attacks against Kyiv and the Kyiv Oblast, causing tremendous damage. And Russia continues to try to take out energy facilities inside Ukraine during a difficult cold winter to try to force Ukrainians into submission, essentially. I think yesterday's meeting was, how do I phrase this? It didn't amount to very much, frankly. And at least it was not an explosion like we saw February 28th when President Zelensky visited the Oval Office in Washington. But it also didn't seem to lead to any major breakthroughs. And what perhaps was troubling was the phone call that President Trump had with President Putin right before Zelensky's visit. And then, as we're speaking, it's possible that Trump and Putin will be talking again today on Monday. President Trump made a comment saying that Putin was very generous in Ukraine succeeding as a nation. That prompted a rather puzzled look, I think, on President Zelensky's face, as it should, because if bombarding Ukraine with missiles and drone attacks is the way of showing his hope for Ukraine's success, it's an odd way of doing it. Putin is the three of us have talked about before, wants to destroy Ukraine. He wants to take over Ukraine. He wants to decapitate Ukraine's leadership. He wants to force Ukraine into submission. He wants to wipe out as many Ukrainians as possible, hence Russian war crimes and crimes against humanity and even genocide against the Ukrainian people. And what Putin wants is to restore as much as possible the Soviet Union that existed, restore Russia as a great power. And it is thanks to the brave Ukrainians that this has proven to be a huge mistake on Putin's part. And it's thanks to your country and others who have provided assistance to Ukraine. Assistance, frankly, on a scale of GDP that is greater than the United States. And so Ukraine continues its heroic battle against this Russian onslaught that continues even as Putin pretends that he wants to end this war. He doesn't want to end the war, and that's the final point of this that I'll say in this opening exchange, which is the problem is Putin. Putin doesn't want to end the war. He only wants to end the war unless it leads to the capitulation of Ukraine. And the only way Ukraine could capitulate is if the West pressures it into doing so. Ukrainians on their own are going to continue to fight. They'll fight whether the United States provides assistance or not. They'll fight whether Europeans provide assistance or not. Because after all, they're fighting for their land, for their freedom, and for their lives. And it's as simple as that. It isn't really a complicated war. There are some wars that are complicated about who started it and who didn't. This one is very black and white. Russia started this war in 2014. It stepped it up in 2022 with the full-scale invasion for no reasons whatsoever, and Russia continues to conduct this campaign, despite the terrible losses that Russia itself has endured as a result of Ukraine's resistance. So I don't think yesterday the meeting at Mar-a-Lago moved things very much, but the plan is that there will be meetings in January that will continue this. But I don't expect, frankly, any major breakthroughs there either.
Actually,
David,
before you get adds what he wants to say, I just want to, share my exasperation. What I've been seeing, at least on mine, the way I've understood all of these, meetings that Zelensky has had with Trump, all throughout the year, one-on-one or with European leaders or with other leaders in general, trying to supposedly come up with a solution. Well, from the American side, this looks like, simple charades, basically. This looks like theater, where the fact that he's meeting with Zelensky or the Ukrainians is almost like a gift, where we're throwing the dog a bone when you don't intend to actually follow through or actually do anything useful. So that's my 2 cents, and no, Gigas has a lot more intelligent things to say than that.
no, I will nail on that, and I will provoke David because he's so old, great friend that I know that he will resist my provocation. Just in this office, David, few minutes, okay, half an hour ago, I had a great meeting with Nino Evganidze, our good friend, and she said interesting thing. She said, Zhigis, all the bad guys are uniting. All this, axis is like really never ever united as such. And we, young and old democracies, we are not. And the biggest problem, then I added, the biggest problem is America. So it's not Putin, it's America that is not, helping unite this world. And I will, I'm now reading more or less every day different books about American-Ukrainian policies. Let's, start with Chicken Kiev, 91 Bush. Even Clinton with Budapest Memorandum actually disarming Ukrainians and giving just bullshit, declaration in return. When I look to all the present, and then Dan Fried corrected me, except Bush the Jr. He tried. Jiggies, he tried in Bucharest with NATO. Yes, actually, I agreed with this. But tell me, this nonsense long-term policy of appeasement, where it could lead, because, and now I will cite the German politician with whom we are much bigger friends than with Americans in Lithuania. He said, remember, Zhigis, when Russians took Berlin, when they had American support, land-lease, material and money-wise, they reached Berlin. And that's what makes us shiver. When Trump is appeasing Putin, and then Lukashenko, another good old friend, with dismantling sanctions, we are seriously afraid that he will give an oxygen to this old killer, and he will march over our heads. That was my sense when I saw Florida, strange statements of Trump, because I'm so unhappy that he's ruling out NATO. He killed military assistance, American. We're now buying it. The only thing is intelligence that he's still sharing. That's great, but it's not enough to win. So okay, that was my cry of the heart. Do you think 26 might be better? Because I read your last article, might Trump be tired, be fooled by Putin? Might he return to good things he did, like sanctioning Rosneft, Lukoil? Can we hope that this, positive America returning? Because we see the polls, we see Reagan and other polls where most of Americans are with us. Can we return to sanctions? Can we return to NATO? Can we return to military assistance? American military assistance, not only us buying your guns. Sorry, it was so long on my heart.
No. It's always a pleasure to hear from you, Gigas. So, first on appeasement. I mean, 1938 showed what happened when countries try to appease leaders like Hitler. And we obviously should not be repeating those terrible mistakes with Putin when it comes to Ukraine. The issues of territory are among the trickiest in these negotiations, and it doesn't seem like in Mar-a-Lago there was agreement between the United States and Ukraine, to say nothing of agreement between Ukraine and Russia when it comes to these. I think President Zelensky has shown tremendous flexibility in trying to accommodate what the United States is trying to achieve, which is an end to the fighting. But the way it is done matters enormously, because if it is done in a way that appeases Putin, that rewards his aggression, we will see this war renew again. It will come back. And that's why I think President Zelensky, the issue of security guarantees, was pressing for 30 or 50 years rather than 15, out of concern that 15 is too short, that risks a renewal of Russia's attack against Ukraine. There's the whole issue of the credibility of U.S. security guarantees, which we can get into later if you want. It is important, I think, that President Zelensky is pressing for Senate ratification of such security guarantees to ensure that it isn't just the Trump administration that's offering these, but any future administrations that would do so. I do think the there is the possibility that Putin will either overplay or misplay his hand. One takeaway from yesterday, I thought, was that Trump thinks this is moving in the right direction. He thinks we are getting closer to a deal. And I think the reality he is going to run into is Putin doesn't agree with it, even if Putin says he does. Putin doesn't want to see an end to this war. Lavrov, of course, and Putin are trying to set this up in a way to avoid pissing off Trump, because what they're doing now is saying that you, Lithuania and Estonia and Poland and Germany and France, the Europeans are now the obstacle to peace between Russia and Ukraine. So what the Russians are trying to do is to pin the blame on Europeans and say to Trump, it's not us. Frankly, it's not even the Ukrainians. It's the Europeans who are egging the Ukrainians on, or the obstacles to peace. I obviously hope that President Trump will not fall for that. And you're right to mention the Lukoil and Rosneft sanctions, which are having an impact. But at the same time, the comments made yesterday leave one scratching his head. One of the trickiest businesses to be in is to predict what President Trump might do. His own son, Donald Trump Jr., remarked a month or two ago that he thinks one of his father's strengths is his unpredictability. It's difficult navigating international affairs, though, when things are so unpredictable. The United States should be a reliable, relentless partner of Europe and Ukraine, because Ukraine is part of Europe, of course. And in that sense, I don't think we should be playing the role that we have been over the past few months, which is a mediator. We should be clearly on Ukraine's side in this war. As I said earlier, there is clear black and white explanation of how this war started. Ukraine is the victim of Russian aggression. Russia started this going back now almost 12 years ago. And we should not be playing this neutral mediating role. What you asked about military assistance. The Congress, when it passed its National Defense Authorization Act, and the funding for the Pentagon included $400 million a year over the next 2 years for Ukraine. That is very small compared to what we've provided over the past few years. But it was important symbolically. And I think it gets at your point, Gigas, and also Vincentas, that Americans actually do support Ukraine. Polls have shown, even among MAGA voters, that there is support for Ukraine, that we don't want to see the United States forcing Ukraine into a situation where it caves to Russia. There's even support for continued assistance, U.S. assistance to Ukraine. Look, I don't mind the arrangement that Trump struck with NATO Secretary General Rutte, where Europe buys American weapons. I would like to see, on top of that, the U.S. providing weapons as well. So it isn't just European purchases of weapons, but the U.S. continuing to provide military assistance. The intelligence sharing is one of the most important things the United States can do. And that I hope will continue. It seems to have continued throughout the year, despite one or two interruptions earlier in the year. But that is the most important thing the United States can do, in addition to avoiding pressuring Ukraine into an awkward situation.
Well, this does beg the question that though, reflecting on what you've just said and on the past year of meetings and negotiations with the Americans, as you say, being mediators, but at least to me, in the past half year at the very least, it has become more than apparent that Trump's and his administration's natural inclination is to be friendly with Putin, other autocrats, to see international affairs as business deals, as opposed to the battle of values of democracy versus darkness, and so at a certain point, yeah, I have to ask myself, why is it like this? I mean, is it because we have these moments, as when Gigas mentioned, when Trump and his administration actually did put sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft, but those sanctions, especially when it came to Belarus, they got lifted pretty quick, or at least suspended. So are we seeing when we see these little breakthroughs in Ukraine's favor, from the American side? Is it truly theater? Uh, I don't think so, but I wanted to hear your opinion on that. And if it's not theater, if it truly is just uh, the whole predisposition to Russia being a far better supposed ally for this administration than Ukraine is, why is that? Is it purely business, or is there something more?
Well, if you look at the national security strategy that was released a few weeks ago, the only reference to Russia was in terms of seeking strategic stability with Russia. There was no criticism or condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And as you know, there was far more criticism of Europe than there was of Russia. And so that was a reflection, I think, of the prevailing mood within the administration. That said, there do seem to be some differences within the administration. I think the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, has been the one who's been pushing for more sanctions. In addition to Rosneft and Lukoil, he has indicated they are ready to impose additional sanctions if Russia continues to be a problem. He referred to Kirill Dmitriev as a Russian propagandist. And so Bessent has been rather outspoken and strong on these issues. I noticed he, as far as I could tell, was not sitting at the table yesterday in Mar-a-Lago. The other person, though, I think in Bessent's camp is the Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, Administrator of USAID, and the archivist, and that is Marco Rubio, who wears four different hats. Rubio, it seems, played an important role in the meetings in Geneva around the time of U.S. Thanksgiving, end of November, when there was floated this absurd 28-point plan. And Rubio was helpful, I think, in walking that back and reframing it in a way that was more palatable for the Ukrainian side. Rubio at least was at the table yesterday, sitting to Trump's right, as far as I could tell. And so I wish their voices would be louder and have more sway and influence on the president than it seems Steve Witkoff's voice. And Witkoff is the one getting at your point, Vincentas, about business with Russia. It is no surprise and no coincidence that Kirill Dmitriev has been the key interlocutor with the U.S. side. Dmitriev is a Harvard and Stanford graduate, a businessman, head of the Russian investment fund, and Witkoff is a businessman and a real estate developer, like his boss, President Trump. And so Dmitriev is appealing to Witkoff, it appears, by talking about all the potential in U.S.-Russian business that could be done if only this Ukraine problem could be pushed aside. And so I think Dmitriev feeds the feeling inside the administration, particularly with Witkov, that Ukraine is an obstacle to better U.S.-Russian relations. Um, to me, it is frankly outrageous to be talking about potential business between the United States and Russia at the same time that Russia launches relentless bombardments of Ukrainian civilians. I don't know how anyone could possibly contemplate the idea of doing business with such a regime. Put aside the problems of investing and doing business in Russia. Bill Browder can tell lots of stories about the difficulties. Browder, of course, as you know, was the largest portfolio investor in Russia in the 90s and into the early 2000s. And then we know what happened in his situation. Russia is a very dangerous place in which to do business. And so I wish that the Besant and Rubio sides of the administration would have more influence. I do want you both have raised the issue of Belarus, and as you know, and Gigas and I have been talking about this for decades. The situation in Belarus back when I was in the State Department, and Gigas, you were the undersecretary in the Foreign Ministry. And we had such productive exchanges and conversations about not just Belarus, but many issues, of course. It seems that we're falling into the same trap that the West has fallen into for years and years. And that is Lukashenko releases some prisoners. Now, let's be clear. He's released some big name prisoners, but these people should never have been put in prison in the first place. And he is getting rewarded for undoing things that he should have never done in the first place. Lukashenko is a master at playing the West and Russia off of each other. It is delusional, in my view, to think that the West can lure him away from Russia. He is 100% dependent on Putin for staying in power. Let's never forget that the full-scale invasion in February of 2022 likely never would have been launched if Putin didn't allow Russian forces to use Belarusian territory to move down into the south toward Kyiv. So Lukashenko has, in my view, the Ukrainian blood on his hands in addition to the blood of his own people on his hands, and is someone we should not be looking at as a potential partner. I'm all for efforts to free people who should not be in prison. I know Lithuania has done a heroic job in welcoming thousands of Belarusians into your country, frankly, Russians as well, and Ukrainians. Your country has played an enormously important role in welcoming people who are fleeing these terrible regimes. But Lukashenko is someone who just knows how to wrap Western officials around his finger. I will say the EU seems to be holding firm, at least for now, when it comes to Belarus. I imagine that's in large part thanks to Lithuania's influence on this situation. But the U.S. seems to be much more accommodating when it comes to Belarus and Lukashenko, and I wish we would review the lessons of the past.
Thank you, David, for those words on Belarus, because actually that was my last question to you. And I want just to confirm what those prisoners, big names, are telling to us. For example, I met, after a long period of time, Nobel Prize winner Belatsky. He begged us to keep, first of all, to keep the hope that freedom and democracy will one day win in Belarus. That's why he was in prison for so long, and he will never stop fighting. And he begged us, please do not support Lukashenko regime. In a way, you might be pushed. The same, I had a lunch today for the first time after 6 years with Pavel Severinets, leader of Christian Democrats. He said the same. Well, we have some of those released prisoners who are hinting that might be good to have business with Lukashenko, but no. I agree with you, and thanks for your solidarity, because even inside Lithuania we have some parties calling for that. I think that would be betrayal, and strategic betrayal, because as Belarusian territory was used to occupy Ukraine, another day it might be used to occupy Vilnius, and we should better invest into buffer of freedom in that territory. I have last 5 minutes to ask my precious question, and that's you also hinted on that on security guarantees and NATO. Like I tried to be rational with. I was not so rational with Biden administration. I was unhappy when he did not invite Ukraine in Vilnius NATO summit. But I'm even more unhappy because Trump reminds me Merkel in Bucharest 2008. The same Merkelism, if I can twist those words. But do you think we could still, after building those security guarantees, do you think this road could lead to invitation into NATO, even if this is a next American president doing this historic job? Because I don't want to take it from the agenda. That saved my soul. We are happy and rich and inspiring people here who shining freedom because of NATO, because of that shelter of security. So do we have a chance to come back to NATO? That's my last question.
Sure. And I know we're short of time, but let me just say quickly, Žygis, that as you know, when I was in the State Department during President Bush's administration, we imposed sanctions on the Lukashenko regime to secure the release of political prisoners. And Belarus's freedom was very much on President Bush's radar screen. Earlier this year in May, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya was in Dallas and met with President Bush as a way to show at least our solidarity now with her cause and the cause of freedom in Belarus, and we will remain steadfast in that commitment. On security guarantees, the 20-point plan, at least as far as I've seen, does not make reference to NATO. The 28-point plan said that NATO will not be on offer for Ukraine. So it seems that the Ukrainians have succeeded in removing that line from the latest version. I think it would be an enormous mistake. And I think it was an enormous mistake for the Biden administration to rule out NATO membership for Ukraine. I think it was an enormous mistake of the Trump administration. In February in Munich, both Secretary Hegseth and Vice President Vance taking NATO membership off the table. Why would you do that before negotiations even start? And having said that, I don't think Ukrainian membership in NATO should be a point of negotiation with the Russians, because you otherwise run the risk of granting Russia a de facto veto over Ukraine's aspirations to join both NATO and the European Union. And let's also remember and never forget that in 2014, actually 2013, it wasn't Ukraine's interest in joining NATO that led Putin to pressure then the pro-Russian president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, to not sign agreements. Those agreements are going to be with the European Union, not with NATO. So Putin doesn't want Ukraine to move in a more Western direction, in a more democratic direction. He is not interested in the success of Ukraine. He is interested in the defeat of Ukraine, in the takeover of Ukraine, and NATO security guarantees are the best way to ensure Ukraine's security in the long term. The last thing I'll say is, and I've said this before, I think NATO would be lucky to have Ukraine as a member. There are many complicated parts of Ukraine's joining NATO, but there is no other country with its military that has, unfortunately, the experience of fighting the Russians, that has the ability to show what it is capable of doing. Ukraine has greater drone technology and production than the United States does. And so we should recognize that Ukraine, as a member of NATO, would not be a consumer, if you will, just sucking up the benefits from NATO membership. It would be a clear contributor to European security if it were to join NATO. And it should be part of President H.W. Bush's vision. This is George W. Bush's father back in 1989 when he talked about a Europe whole, free, and at peace. I don't see how Europe can be whole, free, or certainly not at peace as long as NATO shuts the door to Ukraine. And hopefully one day, since you already spoke to Nino Evganidze earlier today, hopefully you can open the door to Georgia, but not with the current Georgian Dream Party in control there today.
Thank you, David. When I speak with you, I still feel that America is there, and I will also finish with a Christmas card that I shared on my Facebook that I received from Ukraine. it's not about Ukraine joining NATO. It's about NATO joining Ukraine right now because they are so strong. We really need it, at least in Europe. Okay, David, it was such a pleasure, immense pleasure. Your wisdom, your sharpness, your strategic. This is what I call America, and I really hope that this spirit will be back. We need it everywhere in Europe. Well, we are so scared by those developments in Washington that we are getting like Americans. We are arming ourselves, we are investing into defense spending, but we still need you. You inspired it. You created it after Second World War, and I hope I hope America will be back into Europe, and we will make this world much better. Thank you.
From
Dave.
your lips to God's ears, Žygis. I wish you and Vincentas very best for 2026. Thank you for having me on. And to all your fellow Lithuanians, I wish all of you a prosperous and peaceful 2026 and Slava Ukraina.
And the same to you, and see you in America. Heroям slava.
Take it.
Thank you so much.
In my office, in my little opposition office, I have my two best friends, Eka and Nino. Okay, to make it very blunt, without a huge introduction, Lithuanians are afraid that this virus of Georgian dream is spreading. It's first started somewhere in the south, Romania, Bulgaria, then they fought it back, then Central Europe is more or less infected with the autocratic tendencies, and we have our own little tendencies here in Lithuania. So how to recognize the first symptoms of the cancer, how to fight, where maybe we were too late in Georgia because now you fight in the streets, but this fight is so difficult. How to stop it from the very beginning? What can we learn from Georgian examples,
Thank you so much, Žygis, to giving us this opportunity. We're very happy, together with my colleague from Transparency International Georgia, visiting Vilnius in these difficult times for all of us in the world, because the Ukraine is still fighting against the Russian imperialism, and the world really is freaking out, and the upside down. Yes, and in this situation, of course, we're here to seeking the friends and the partners, because we continue to fight and convince the rest of the world that the fight in Georgia, whatever we're going through right now, it's not only the Georgia's fight, it's fight of all of us for our values, for freedom, democracy, and for against the Russian imperialism. I cannot, that teach you, because the Lithuanians, as the Georgians and the Ukrainians, understand better than anyone else in the world. Even we're feeling this on a genetic level, when the Russians are coming and when the Russians are trying to capture our state and our institutions, and to export whatever greatest export goods they have. It's not an oil, it's in a corruption, and everything is kind of we see what is going in a different part of the Europe, we see what is going in the United States, and in this fight, that all these bad guys are together, and all the good people who are fighting for freedom and democracy were kind of fractured and not coordinated. And this is the main problem with our fight everywhere, as I understand,
So the main problem is lack of solidarity. We don't help each other.
Solidarity everywhere, lack of solidarity in fighting Ukrainians against the Russians, and lack of solidarity Georgians, the fighting the same fight in Georgia, but right now on the that the hybrid warfare level, because the Georgia was the first victim of the Russia invasion, you remember, not only in 2008, but in early 90s. But at that time, no one calling that was a fight or war between the Georgia and Russia, and how we ended up. It will continue if we're not going to stop spreading this that the Russian influence everywhere, because the symptoms, you remember, you were visiting all the time the Georgia, and you were one of the first who like believing us and saying that we see that the Russians are coming, because that the country who was fighting all like the last 250 years for against the Russian imperialism, which government will do or take this kind of steps, which is blocking the Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration. And my colleague Eka, she was counting even for 1 year, not the 13 years since they are in the power, but only for 1 year, they were like 41 steps that they made against the Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration.
On the side.
Yes, inside of the country and outside of the country, because their main goal and the Russia's main goal, and it's not the Georgian dream like separate from their Russian, like, that the heads or bosses, because this is a Russian style gangster mafia, like, that the regime which is doing everything to take Georgia from its Euro-Atlantic aspirations. And the fight we're going through right now, it's on tomorrow, it's going to be the 400 days, We are standing in the streets. We are fighting. We have a 7 times more political prisoners per capita rather than in Russia for small Georgia. And we have somewhere that the 500 people were arrested, 300 people tortured, and we're still there. And the fighting for our freedom, this is which is kind of very unique, and we should never stop to fighting for this. But we need our friends with us, to fight this fight.
If I could just jump on what you said, and maybe Eka, you could help me a bit. I know about all the mistakes international community made on Georgia. I was in Bucharest NATO summit. I saw the failure of then Germans and French. Now I see this failure of, again, Trump administration, to not to advance Ukrainian NATO dreams. Then in 2008, we didn't have candidate status, EU accession was also blocked. So yes, of course, EU and NATO accession heals it, but still, inside the EU and NATO, you have the same Georgian dream phenomenon spreading. Can you say from inside Eka, what are those steps that Georgian dream made that we should be cautious, watching in our society? In our society, we're now fighting, as you see, for freedom of media, national broadcaster. But what are other internal moves that those Russian regimes are making to make our countries Russian again?
Thank you for having me. So yes, I think that one of the most important policies, I would say, they had was the special strategic communication that they had with the population. Because it's true that they are strong because they have very wise strategic communication. They have these disinformation channels. They have coordinated their messages in the social media, but also they have very strong TV stations who are spreading disinformation and false information about the West, about the values of the West, of course, using each and every mistake that was done by the Western communities or the leadership, also winning the hearts and minds of people on the ground, being very simple when communicating with them, attacking and undermining the democratic institutions outside of Georgia and inside of Georgia, attacking and undermining these groups like the independent media, the investigative journalists, the civil society. And they are extremely successful in all this. And sometimes we think that who would believe in that story that there is, for instance, the deep state, which is fighting and like, trying to intervene in the sovereign affairs of the state, and like, who would believe in this, and who would believe that someone is dragging Georgia in war, and who would believe in this nonsense? Sometimes these politicians are talking about the corruption of like really nice people, like those who are transparent, who are fighting for their country, who are patriots of the country, and they themselves are so corrupt, those officials who are talking about these nice people. And then we also ask ourselves, like, who would believe to this? And we should not put ourselves in this self-defense situation, and we should not like really say anything because no one will believe in this. But in fact, in several months' time, you see that someone believes in this, and then raising the questions, and then because these messages are so simple and so kind of easy for the people to understand. And we, the smart, educated people on the other side, saying that, okay, so people should check this disinformation and should not believe in everything. So we are losing. And so this is like one of the examples, and one of the examples, or the experiences that we, the civil society, have received during all these years and months of protest, is that we try also to work on the strategic communication. We try to communicate with the people, not to put ourselves in the self-defense, but really explain to them the basics, really. And we should not be lazy doing this. This is very important.
Okay, just last question to you. I just had last week many Circassians from all over the world, and they were telling stories that we didn't knew. I knew about Chechen genocide, but we have a lot of sad stories in Caucasus. Despite that, you regained your freedom. You have your state. And the work you've been doing with this wonderful McCain conference, that for me, I think is still the best international conference on security and freedom in Europe, I would say. Not even Globsec, not even Warsaw Security. Your conference was the best, or is the best.
Thank you.
But, you have so many friends who understand one thing in the West, that this is the only way for Georgia to survive, to join EU and NATO. The only. Okay, you will have some Russians in your body trying to overthrow your liberty, democracy, but finally, it's a lot of antiviruses in your body in case you're in the family. But do those who took the power in Georgia understand that going this Russian or Chinese way, this will end like to Circassians sooner or later, or Chechens or anyone around? Do they understand that they are annihilating the nation, and the only way, as we are also small as you, also historic nation, we understood in the very beginning that to consolidate freedom is the only way to go into the family of free and democratic nations. Do they understand the Georgian dream, that they are annihilating the nation itself, or not?
I believe that they understand that they have to do everything to isolate Georgia as a free, independent European country. In this, they are very smart. And I don't think that they have this like a naive approach that they don't understand. They understand everything very well. They're following the Putin's regime's the step, and doing everything to make Georgia the backyard of the Russia. But the people of the Georgia, they are not agree with that. Why we are protesting for last that 400 days with a non-stop regime? Because we know that we are it's our fight, no one is going to come and fight your fight. And we were doing this for last 250 years against the Russians, And I remember this, that the very famous British intelligence officer who was prototype of the agent MI6, like a 007 agent, he wrote the book about the Georgians in 1934. because he was spending the time, all the, like, you know, the big time with the people who were immigrated from the Georgia and fighting against the Russian imperialism all the time. And he was like a last sentence, he was writing some, like, explaining who the Georgians are and why it's too difficult to understand Anglo-Saxons, why they're fighting to the like a Lucifers against the Russian imperialism. But it was, I remember and love this last sentence, that never bet against the Georgian people's resilience, you know, because there might be like a dying old nation for defending their freedom and the country. And I believe in this because all these people who are in jail right now, 100 or around the 100 political prisoners, they are the heroes of this country who were, it's our generational fight, you know. We all understand why we're staying there, because it's our country and we have to defend, even we're going to be only people there to fight for our freedom. If our friends going to be helping us, supporting us as they were doing, like Lithuanians and some other nations who really understand for what we are fighting all together, okay, we will win this fight. If we see that even if the Lithuanians do not understand what we are fighting for, then we're going to lose this fight, and we will realize that this cancer is in your body right now, and we all have to fight for this because we need the solidarity. We need to Ukraine win this war, because without Ukrainians winning this war, I don't know whoever will survive in this neighborhood or in Europe as well, you know. And for us, it's very vital. And I want to wish in this new year, you know, to Ukraine to win and our victory for all of us as well.
Thank you, Nino. And I remember well your Rose Revolution. I was one of the first visitors from the West with Bruce Jackson, later on Asmus. So Georgia started it all. And I think we will end in Georgia. The fight will be successful. I'm quite sure. Because I don't think that even so many other nations right now who were not so strong than like Georgians, Ukrainians, Moldovans, I don't think that they would rise for that fight. So some people call Lithuanians as Georgians of the Baltics. So we also have part of your spirit and soul. And yes, this is one fight. This is fight against Russian Empire that is going on for 500 years, I would say, but we will win it.
Yeah, and also we would love to express our gratitude to the Lithuanians because they were the first imposing the sanctions against the Bidzina Ivanishvili last year in the winter time exactly. And we are very, very much appreciate the support, and we will never forget who were standing next to us when it was the dark times for Georgia. Thank you so much for your help and the solidarity.